September 21, 1935, 3:17 a.m. The warehouse on Pier 42 was supposed to be empty. The deal was done, the money was counted, the handshake had sealed everything. But the scent of betrayal hangs thicker than river fog, and Bumpy Johnson smelled it the moment he stepped through the doorway. His driver, a young kid named Ray, was already on the floor, a dark pool spreading beneath him from a single, precise bullet behind the ear. The four men Bumpy had brought with him, his best earners from the 135th Street Numbers Bank, were against the far wall, hands raised, staring down the barrels of 12 Tommy guns held by men whose faces were shadowed by hat brims. And standing in the center of it all, under the single, swaying bulb that cast long, dancing shadows, was Frankie, the whip, Caruso, Lucky Luciano's personal cleaner. He had a smile that didn't touch his cold, dead eyes. "Evening, Bumpy," Frankie said, his voice a gravelly scrape. "Mr. Luciano sends his regrets, says the deal's changed." Bumpy didn't move, his hands stayed loose at his sides, his face a mask of calm granite. He took in the scene, the math of it, 12 guns, 4 of his men terrified, 1 boy dead on the floor, and him, unarmed, in the center of the kill box. He looked past the guns, past Frankie's smirk, to the empty space where the crates of scotch were supposed to be. The entire shipment vanished. The $50,000 payment gone. This wasn't a robbery, this was an erasure. Changed how? Bumpy asked, his voice low and steady, a rumble in the quiet warehouse. Frankie's smirk widened. Changed to, "We take everything, and you take a swim." "The boss says Harlem's been a good experiment, but experiments end. We appreciate you getting the distribution lines running smooth. We'll take it from here." One of Bumpy's men, a guy called Quick Johnny, made a small, desperate sound in his throat. Frankie's eyes flicked to him, and the Tommy gun in his hand shifted a fraction. That was all Bumpy needed to see. Luciano wasn't just breaking the deal, he was declaring war on a scale Dutch Schultz never dreamed of. This was a corporate takeover, bloody and absolute. And they'd used his trust, used the peace he'd negotiated, to set the table for his funeral. Bumpy let his gaze drop to young Ray on the concrete. 16 years old, a good kid who wanted to be a saxophone player. He'd driven Bumpy tonight as a favor, for the extra $5. Now he was meat on a cold floor. Bumpy looked back up at Frankie. "You tell Lucky something for me," Bumpy said, and every man in the room tensed, fingers curling around triggers. "You tell him this ain't how you do business. You tell him he just bought himself a problem he can't put down with a checkbook." Frankie laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You're a dead man giving messages. That's cute." He raised his chin, the signal to his triggerman. But before a single finger could tighten, Bumpy did the one thing they didn't expect. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. Not toward cover, not toward a weapon, but toward Frankie Caruso. The move was so audacious, so utterly against the script of fear they'd written, that it created a heartbeat of hesitation. In that heartbeat, Bumpy spoke, his eyes locked on Frankie's. "You pull those triggers, you kill me and mine in this room, and you know what you get. You get a ghost. You get every street in Harlem turning against you. You get coppers who are on my payroll suddenly remembering their badges. You get newsboys shouting about a massacre on Pier 42. Lucky wants clean books and quiet money. You do this, and the noise you make will bring down heat from here to City Hall. You think you're taking over a business. You're lighting a fuse on a powder keg." He took another step. The Tommy guns tracked him, but the certainty in Frankie's eyes had cracked, replaced by a flicker of doubt. Bumpy saw it. He was playing the only card he had, the mind game. He was betting Luciano's men had orders for a clean, quiet disappearance, not a loud, messy slaughter. Or, Bumpy continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried, "You let us walk out of here. You go back to Lucky, and you tell him Bumpy Johnson understands a change in terms needs a proper discussion. Man to man, not rat in a trap. You tell him he wants to end our deal, he looks me in the eye and says it. Then we see." Frankie's jaw worked. The order had been simple. Wipe them out, dump them in the harbor. But this Harlem boss wasn't begging, he was negotiating from the floor of his own execution. He was talking about political heat and noisy consequences, things Mr. Luciano hated. Killing him now felt messy. Letting him go felt dangerous. In that paralysis of a middleman caught between a hard order and hard reality, Bumpy found his crack. "You got 10 seconds to be a messenger or a murderer," Bumpy said. "Your choice. But choose smart, Frankie. 'Cause the men behind you got wives and kids in Brooklyn. You think they're safe if Harlem starts burning tonight." That did it. The implied threat against their families, the vision of an all-out war not with rival gangsters but with an entire enraged neighborhood, made a few of the barrel-chested gunmen shift uncomfortably. Frankie saw his clean hit turning complicated. He cursed under his breath. "You got a week," he spat, lowering his Tommy gun a fraction. "A week to get your affairs in order, to tell your people it's over. You meet Mr. Luciano 1 week from tonight. Alone. You come to him. Then you get your terms." Bumpy gave a slow, single nod. 1 week. I'll come. He didn't wait for permission. He turned his back on the 12 Tommy guns, the ultimate act of cold defiance, and walked to his 4 men. "Get Ray," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "Take him home to his mother." He didn't look back at Frankie Caruso as they lifted the boy's body. He just walked out of the warehouse into the chilly pre-dawn air, the taste of betrayal and river salt on his tongue. He was alive, but Lucky Luciano had just declared war. And Bumpy Johnson now had 7 days to turn the tables on the most powerful criminal in America. This is the story of the deal that almost ended Harlem's independence, the hit that backfired, and the night Bumpy Johnson taught the commission that some men can't be bought, can't be scared, and can't be erased. To understand how we got to that warehouse, you have to rewind the tape. You have to understand Harlem in 1935. The Depression is squeezing the life out of the city, but in Harlem, there's a pulse, a desperate, vibrant energy. And where there's desperation, there's money to be made. The numbers racket is the heartbeat of the community. Pennies and nickels bet on dreams, paying out hundreds. It's a black-run economy, and at the top of it sits a man who isn't just a boss, but a bulwark. Bumpy Johnson. He'd already seen off the Dutch Schultz threat, not with a bloody war, but with a display of strategic brutality that made the Mad Hatter back down. Harlem was his, but the world outside was changing. Prohibition was over, and the Italian syndicates, once busy with bootlegging, were consolidating, forming what the papers would call the Commission. They were corporatizing crime, and their eyes were on every profitable neighborhood. Harlem, with its thriving numbers and policy banks, was a prime target. Lucky Luciano, the visionary behind the new order, was a different beast from the hot-headed Schultz. Schultz was a wild dog. Luciano was a chess master. He didn't want to burn Harlem down. He wanted to quietly acquire it, fold it into his portfolio. He saw Bumpy not as a rival warlord, but as a potentially troublesome local manager. In the spring of '35, the offers started. Polite, at first. A sit-down at a neutral club in Midtown. Luciano's men, smooth talkers in $1,000 suits, laid it out. A partnership. The Italians provide protection from police interference downtown, muscle against any other rivals. Bumpy continues to run the day-to-day in Harlem. In return, the Luciano organization takes a 30% share of the numbers gross. It was a velvet-gloved takeover. Bumpy listened, his face unreadable. He knew what they were really selling: become a subsidiary or be destroyed. He'd seen what their protection did to other neighborhoods, siphoned the life out, left the locals as hollowed-out puppets. But saying no outright to Lucky Luciano in 1935 was a suicide note. So, Bumpy did what Bumpy does. He played the long game. He counter-proposed. Not a cut of the numbers, that was Harlem's blood. Instead, he offered something they wanted more: distribution. Harlem was a fortress, a maze only his people knew. He proposed a joint venture on liquor distribution for the entire Upper Manhattan area. The Italians had the supply, the political clout to move trucks. Bumpy had the warehouses, the trucks that never got stopped by Harlem cops, the army of runners who could get a bottle of scotch into any speakeasy, nightclub, or social club north of 110th Street without a single hiccup. It was a side door. It gave Luciano a profit stream without touching the core of Bumpy's power. After weeks of tense negotiation, Luciano, intrigued by the pragmatism of it, agreed. The deal was struck. For 6 months, it worked. Money flowed. Trucks rolled in and out of warehouses like Bumpy's on Pier 42 without a problem. Luciano's accountants were pleased. It looked, to the outside world, like Bumpy Johnson had bowed his head, had become a partner to the mob. Some in Harlem whispered he'd sold out. But Bumpy knew the truth. He'd bought time. He'd used Luciano's own greed to build a firewall around his real kingdom, the numbers. He was letting them profit from his territory's thirst for liquor, while keeping their hands off his people's dreams. But Bumpy Johnson never forgot who he was dealing with. He knew Luciano viewed him as a utility, a piece on the board. And in corporate takeovers, once the utility has served its purpose, it's dismantled for parts. He had eyes everywhere. He had a kid named Polly, who shined shoes outside a social club in Little Italy. He had Martha, a waitress at a diner where Luciano's drivers ate. He paid for whispers, for hints, for rumors. And the whispers started in late August. Whispers that Luciano was getting pressure from the other families. That Harlem was too rich, too independent. That letting a black man run such a profitable show was bad for the commission's image. The word, consolidation, started floating around. Bumpy heard it all. He tightened his inner circle. He moved his cash houses weekly. He prepared. But he also knew he couldn't win a straight war. The Luciano organization was too big, too connected. If it came to open conflict, Harlem would be drowned in blood, and he'd lose everything he'd built to protect. So he planned for the move he knew was coming. The betrayal. He just didn't know it would come wearing the face of a deal, in a warehouse where he'd promised safe passage. The morning after the warehouse, Bumpy didn't sleep. He sat in the back room of the Braddock Hotel, the body of young Ray laid out respectfully on a table, covered with a sheet. Ray's mother had wept herself silent. Bumpy had placed $500 in her hand, a king's ransom, and promised her justice. Not the court kind, the Harlem kind. His inner circle was gathered. Illinois Gordon, his right hand, a man whose loyalty was forged in prison iron. Junie Bird, the strategist, older and wiser, who saw angles in shadows. Willie Eyes Jackson, who ran his intelligence network. And Quick Johnny, who'd been in the warehouse, still shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "They're gonna come for it all," Quick Johnny said, pacing. "We gotta hit them first. Hit their spots in Brooklyn. Hit their..." "Sit down," Bumpy said, his voice quiet but slicing through the panic. "You hit Luciano's spots, you know what happens. The whole commission declares war. Every Italian gang from here to Chicago sends soldiers. They flood Harlem with enough firepower to make the St. Valentine's massacre look like a picnic. We don't win that fight. We get massacred, and our neighborhood burns. So what?" Illinois growled. "We just wait for them to pick us off. They killed a kid, Bumpy. A driver." Bumpy's eyes went to the sheet-covered form. "I know what they did. And they did it 'cause they think we're animals in a cage. They think we only understand force. So we don't give them force. We give them a problem they can't solve with a Tommy gun." Junie Bird, stroking his chin, spoke up. "The deal was the distribution. They took the shipment, they took the money. They voided the contract." "Exactly," Bumpy said, a cold light in his eyes. "They broke their word. In their world, that's a sin. In their new, corporate, commission world, a broken contract is a liability. Luciano wants to be the sophisticated boss, the businessman. You can't be a businessman if your partners can't trust your handshake." "But they don't see us as partners," Willie Eyes said. "They see us as help. Then we make them see us differently," Bumpy said. "We make this about their rules, not our rage. Luciano didn't just betray me. He betrayed his own code. The code he's selling to the other families to keep them in line. We shine a light on that." He laid out the plan. It wasn't about guns. It was about information, perception, and leverage. Phase 1. Document everything. They had the original deal sheets, signed by Luciano's lieutenant, Tommy, Three Fingers, Brown. They had records of every truck shipment, every payment delivered. Willie Eyes was to get statements, signed and notarized by neutral parties, warehouse owners, truck rental agents, proving the Luciano organization had received the goods and the payments. They were going to build a paper trail of the betrayal. Phase 2. Find the weakness in Luciano's new empire. Not the soldiers, but the suits. The accountants. The lawyers starting to circle the organization, looking to launder the new, legitimate, profits. Bumpy had heard whispers about a man named Arthur Finch, a Wall Street numbers man with a gambling problem and ties to Luciano's front companies. Phase 3. The meeting. Bumpy would go to Luciano in 1 week, as agreed. But he wouldn't go to beg or to fight. He would go to arbitrate. And he would bring the court with him. For the next 7 days, Harlem operated under a surface of tense normalcy. But beneath, Bumpy's machine worked. Willie Eyes, using a combination of bribes and threats, got the signed affidavits. A warehouse foreman on the Jersey docks, terrified of both sides, confessed under duress that Luciano's men had ordered him to relocate the Scotch shipment to a different warehouse owned by a commission front. The paper trail was solid. Junie Bird, using contacts deep in the Tammany Hall political machine, found Arthur Finch. The man was in debt to the tune of 20 grand to a Chinatown gambling den, debts that could end his Wall Street career and his life. Bumpy had him brought to a quiet apartment in Sugar Hill. Finch, a man used to ledgers and stock tickers, sat trembling before the king of Harlem. Bumpy didn't shout. He poured the man a drink. "Mr. Finch," Bumpy said, "I understand you're in a tight spot. I'm in a business dispute with some of your associates. The Luciano organization. I believe they've breached a contract with me." Finch swallowed hard. I don't know anything about that. I just handle some of their legitimate investments." "I'm sure you do," Bumpy said smoothly. "And I'm sure you're very careful. But a breach of contract is bad for business. Bad for legitimacy. Now, I have here a full accounting of their side of our deal, and their subsequent theft of my assets. I need someone who understands high finance to look it over, to verify that from a business standpoint, their actions are fraudulent. A credible, white, Wall Street expert." He slid the folder of documents across the table. "You do this for me. You write me a letter on your professional letterhead stating that based on the evidence, the Luciano organization has engaged in bad faith dealings and theft. You give me that, and I give you this." Bumpy placed a bag on the table. It contained $20,000 in used bills. "Your debt to the Dragon's Den disappears. My people will handle it. You walk away clean." Finch stared between the damning documents and the bag of money, between a rock and a hard place that had just turned into a lifeline. "And if they find out?" he whispered. "They won't," Bumpy said. "Unless you tell them. And if you tell them, you'll have to explain the 20 grand you borrowed from the Chinese to cover your markers, and then the 20 grand you mysteriously came into to pay them off. I don't think Mr. Luciano likes loose ends or financial advisors with messy secrets. Do you?" The meeting with Luciano was set for September 28, at a private club in Midtown, a place owned by the commission, neutral ground. The word on the street was that Bumpy Johnson was going to his own funeral, that he'd walk in and never walk out. Luciano would make an example of him, show everyone what happens when you rise above your station. The night of the meeting, Bumpy dressed with immaculate care. A dark, tailored suit, a crisp white shirt, a black tie. He looked like a banker, not a gangster. He instructed Illinois Gordon and Junie Bird. "You don't come in with me. You wait outside. If I'm not out in 1 hour, you take the copies of everything, the contracts, the affidavits, Finch's letter, and you deliver them. One set to the office of the district attorney, Thomas Dewey." Dewey was the gangbuster prosecutor who was already making life hell for the mob, the one man Luciano truly feared. The other set, Bumpy said, you deliver to Meyer Lansky. Lansky was Luciano's own strategic partner, the financial brain of the commission. A man obsessed with order, stability, and the long-term legitimacy of their operations. You give it to a Lansky man directly. Make sure he knows what it is. It was a double-barreled threat. Exposure to the law, and exposure to his own partners for violating the very rules of business he was trying to establish. Bumpy walked into the club alone. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of power. The room was opulent. Dark wood, leather booths, crystal decanters. At a large round table in the center sat Lucky Luciano, flanked by Tommy Three Fingers Brown, Frankie, the Whip, Caruso, and 2 other senior captains. Luciano was smaller than Bumpy expected, but his presence filled the room. Sharp, intelligent eyes missed nothing. He didn't smile. "Bumpy," Luciano said, his voice oddly high-pitched but commanding. "You came. I respect that. A deal's a deal, Bumpy said, standing before the table. Even when one side breaks it. Frankie Caruso scowled. Luciano held up a hand, silencing him. We had a partnership. Partnerships sometimes get reevaluated. The numbers operation in Harlem. It's become a point of discussion among my associates. It's messy. It draws attention. We think it's time for a more integrated management. You mean you take it? Bumpy said flatly. I mean we streamline it, Luciano corrected. You've done a good job. You can stay on in an advisory role. You'll be compensated. Bumpy almost smiled. The offer was an insult wrapped in a dismissal. You stole $50,000 and a shipment of my goods. You killed one of my boys. That's not streamlining. That's theft and murder. Luciano's eyes turned cold. Watch your tone. You're here because I'm allowing it. You have no leverage. Your choice is simple. Walk away with a pension, or don't walk away at all. This was the moment. Bumpy reached into his inner jacket pocket. Every man at the table except Luciano tensed, hands moving toward holsters. Slowly, Bumpy pulled out not a gun, but a thin folder. He placed it on the table in front of Luciano. My leverage, Bumpy said. Luciano didn't touch it. What is this? A breach of contract case, Bumpy said. Page 1. The signed agreement for joint liquor distribution, signed by your representative, Mr. Brown here. Page 2 through 10. Shipping manifests, delivery confirmations, and bank deposit slips showing my organization fulfilled all obligations for the last quarter. Page 11. An affidavit from Joseph Gimpy Marino, foreman of Pier 42 warehouse, stating that on the night of September 21st, under orders from Frankie Caruso, he relocated the shipment consigned to my organization to a warehouse owned by Four Corners Import-Export, a company registered to your cousin, Holly Luciano. Page 12. A notarized statement from my accountant detailing the missing $50,000 payment. Luciano's face was a stone mask, but a tiny muscle twitched in his jaw. Bumpy continued. Page 13. A professional opinion letter from Mr. Arthur Finch of Finch & Sterling, Wall Street Advisors. He's reviewed the documents and concludes, and I quote, the actions of the Luciano organization constitute a clear-cut case of commercial fraud and bad faith, actionable in civil court and indicative of a pattern of illicit business practice. The room was dead silent. Luciano's captains looked at each other, confusion and dawning alarm on their faces. They were killers, not lawyers. This was a language they didn't speak. Luciano spoke it fluently. He finally reached out and opened the folder, scanning the pages. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. You think a piece of paper scares me? Luciano said, his voice dangerously soft. No, Bumpy said, but Thomas Dewey does. He'd love this. A signed roadmap of your operations, your front companies, your methods. A Wall Street expert calling you a fraud. This isn't about sending coppers to arrest you for murder, Charlie. This is about sending federal accountants to dismantle you. This is about giving Meyer Lansky and the other families proof that you're reckless, that you break your own deals and bring heat. You're trying to build a corporation. Corporations die from scandal, not bullets. He let that hang in the air. I have 2 more copies of this folder. One is in a safe place, to be delivered to Dewey's office if I don't leave this room. The other is on its way to Meyer Lansky right now, so he understands the liability you've created for the entire commission. The mention of Lansky's name did it. Luciano's eyes flickered with something raw and furious. He had built the commission with Lansky. Lansky's trust was the cornerstone of his power. This folder was a grenade rolled into the middle of that foundation. Frankie Caruso, who only understood force, stood up. Boss, let me handle this dumb. Sit down and shut up. Luciano snarled, the calm veneer shattering. He stared at Bumpy with a new intensity. This wasn't a Harlem gangster. This was a strategist who had outmaneuvered him on his own board. What do you want? The question was a surrender, and everyone heard it. 3 things, Bumpy said, his voice firm. 1. The $50,000, plus $10,000 for the boy's mother, delivered to my office by tomorrow. 2. The liquor distribution deal is terminated. You keep your hands off Harlem, all of it, the numbers, the policy, everything. Your trucks don't roll north of 110th Street unless I personally approve it. 3. Him. Bumpy pointed at Frankie Caruso. He gave the order that killed my driver. He represents the breach of your word. A business needs to clean up its liabilities. Luciano stared. You want me to give you one of my captains? I want you to handle your own problem, Bumpy corrected. You made the mess with his trigger finger. You clean it. That's what a real boss does. You show me, you show Harlem, and you show Meyer Lansky that you can enforce discipline in your own house. That this, he tapped the folder, was a rogue action, not your policy. The demand was breathtaking in its audacity. Bumpy was forcing Luciano to cannibalize his own man to save face. It was the ultimate chess move, checkmate with the opponent's own piece. Luciano looked at Frankie, who had gone pale. Frankie had acted on implied orders, on the understood desire of his boss. Now he was being offered up as a sacrifice to prove the boss's honor. The silence stretched. Luciano was calculating, weighing the value of a loyal, violent captain against the stability of his entire empire, against the trust of Lansky. Finally, he leaned back. Wait outside, Frankie. Frankie's face crumpled. Boss, you can't. Outside, Luciano roared. Defeated, Frankie Caruso shuffled out of the room, a dead man walking. Luciano turned his cold gaze back to Bumpy. The money will be delivered. The deal is terminated. Harlem is yours. Now get the hell out of my club. Bumpy didn't gloat. He gave a single, respectful nod. A man's word is his bond, Mr. Luciano. I'm glad we could understand each other. He turned and walked out, leaving the folder on the table. He passed a stricken Frankie Caruso in the hallway, not even glancing at him. Outside, Illinois and Junie rushed up. What happened? Bumpy took a deep breath of the free night air. We won. Get word to Willie Eyes. The package for Lansky. Don't deliver it, yet. He kept that insurance. 2 days later, the $60,000 was delivered by a nervous accountant. And the word spread through the underworld like a shockwave. Frankie, the whip, Caruso was found in the trunk of his own car in New Jersey, 2 bullets in the back of his head. The message was clear, but the bigger message was the one not spoken aloud. Bumpy Johnson had gone toe-to-toe with Lucky Luciano, the architect of modern organized crime, and had not only walked away alive but had forced the mob boss to pay reparations and kill his own man to square the debt. He had fought them with their own weapons, paper, contracts, and the threat of exposure. He had out-businessed the businessmen. In Harlem, the legend solidified. Bumpy wasn't just the man who protected them from street-level predators, he was the man who had stared down the corporate monster downtown and made it blink. He had proven that even the most powerful syndicate could be held accountable, if you were smart enough, if you fought on the terrain of the mind, not just the street. The Luciano incident changed the rules. No other Italian family ever tried a direct takeover of Harlem. They'd learned the cost was too high, not in bodies, but in reputation and stability. Bumpy Johnson had become untouchable not because he was the most violent, but because he was the most strategically brilliant. He had turned Luciano's own hit into a referendum on the mob's new rules, and he had won. For years after, the story was told in barbershops and nightclubs. How Bumpy walked into the lion's den with a folder instead of a gun. How he made Lucky Luciano, the king of New York, pay him and then clean his own house. It was a story of intellect over instinct, of justice that used the system against itself. It proved that in a world of wolves, the sharpest mind is the only shield you need. Bumpy Johnson never forgot the lesson. Power wasn't about who had the most guns, it was about who understood the most consequences. He had looked at the chessboard of New York crime, seen 3 moves ahead, and turned a death sentence into a declaration of independence. That's why they called him the Godfather of Harlem. Not because he was the cruelest, but because he was the smartest. He knew the true price of everything, and he made his enemies pay it in full.